Now we know the body, so we call the API within the page. So use effect with empty bracket. Now, as I said, there'll be 10 sessions, so you all have to remember is use effect with empty bracket is a term which all of you should remember is used is event for page load. So, which means there's no user interaction. In that case, I can call this API on use effect with empty bracket, or there's no other variable apart from local session storage or apart from params, right? If these two are used for calling the API, okay, you have to remember that you're always going to use effect with empty bracket for calling API, because tomorrow we are going to talk about the what is entered into empty bracket, which is called as the dependency. Okay, so I'll talk about the dependency tomorrow, but for today we are calling standard list using API where only local storage and session storage are called. So here there is no user action, or it is not waiting for any data to populate from API or from any other source. So we are going to call this API into empty bracket. So this is going to be your baseline, because as I said, every time I tell you something, those terms you have to understand. So use effect with empty bracket refers to page load, something that happens when your user comes to screen for the first time, does not interact. Page load is the event. So in page load event, what we are going to call the API, right? So I'll show you where it is. So in this use effect with empty bracket, we are calling API, and we are calling get all standards. So tomorrow we'll see one more API calling, which is not called in the empty bracket because there's a data which it is expecting. Okay. Now, calling API doesn't require use effects, because that is another mistake which I've seen people doing that. For example, on a click of save, I am calling an API to save the data. People have called this entire code inside button click. That is not purpose. Use effect is an event. Same way button click is an event. Selecting dropdown is an event, right? So those events can also call this API. Right now we are talking about the API which is called on the page load to get the list of standards. So use effect with empty brackets reports to the page event. Similarly, there are other events, as I said, selection of the dropdown, click of button, entering of the text. These are all events. We'll see as we go, right? But this is also an event that first time whenever the screen is loaded, this is the event where use effect with empty bracket will trigger. Inside that, whatever you code you write will be only run once. That is when the page is loaded. First time when I come to the screen, only then this code will get executed, right? So we are calling the API inside use effect with empty bracket because we want to call it on the page load, and the API is expecting these parameters which are available without any interaction, without waiting for somebody. That is why it is possible. Okay. So once the API is called, the data is stored inside store. There is concept of store in React. Okay. This is a Redux hook concept. So you all need to be familiar with this term, Redux, use effect, local and session storage, state variables, param and local dot state. Right? So many React terms has come and we have still not populated the dropdown, right? We have not still got the data in the page. So till then we have learned so many concepts of React. So the first step was to call the API. The next step was that if I have to call API, I have to create body. I'm getting it from local and session storage. And this API is called within use effect with empty bracket because this API should be called when the page is loaded. Whenever the API is called, the data is pulled from database and stored inside store. Okay, that data is stored inside a store. That is a Redux concept. So if you learn Redux, if you understand store, you will understand what I'm saying. Next concept is I got the data in store and I showed you that code. So this is a code. Dispatch is a Redux concept where API is called. Okay, so dispatch is used to call API in Redux hook. So there are other ways of calling API. When you involve with Redux, dispatch is the way you can call the API. Okay, and obviously that data is coming and getting stored into your store. So if I got all the standards for this school ID and academic year ID, until this step, the data is come to the store, but I want to see that data on the page. So pull the data from store on the page using use selector. Okay, so this is next React concept which you have to understand. So where is the code? Use selector. This is the code, right? So if I don't call this, then the data will be called from API and stored in a store, but is not accessible on the page. So if I want to use into the page, I have to call the use selector. Okay. So most of you know how the code works, but most of you don't know how to create a flow when you write a code, right? So as we are talking today about dropdown, you will see that slowly you have built an ability to write complex functionalities. And for that, you need to become familiar of the sequence which I'm talking about. So this is a sequence. First, I have to call the API. For calling API, I need parameters. Now I have parameters, so I'll call this API inside use effect, which is nothing but a page load scenario. For inside use effect, if I have to call the API, I have to use dispatch. Dispatch is going to pull the data into the store, and from store I have to get on the page that data using use selector. So Ankita, is it clear till this point or is it confusing?
No, sir, clear, sir.
Okay, right? But whenever I talk, you need to use this language. Page load means use effect, but with empty bracket is the most important word you have to use. Okay, for every developer here, I am going to discuss for next 1 month their development page, and I am going to use these terms. Page load means you should talk use effect with empty bracket. Getting data on page means you should say use selector. Right, so these are technical terms which React uses for giving this flow. Right, so till now, if you see, we have got the data on the page.